That's very nice. I think I like this interview. I think
If you are just waking up right now, NBC News now officially projecting that Donald Trump has won the presidency.
No, I'll tell you, Burger King. We did the double,
Whopper?
The double.
I haven't ripped Burger King in a long time.
Yo,
Burger King kind of sucks.
Yeah.
This group influenced the presidential election of 2024.
Yo, listen. Don't even say influence. We decided.
We were the turning point.
Just know he was not up until this pod.
It's true.
After the pod, he surges, 3 or 4%?
Yeah, it was a rap, dude.
I voted for none of this.
Why do they say Israel's like starving the people of Gaza?
Well, because we're trying to get the food in, and we let food trucks in, and guess what happens when we let them in? Hamas steals the food.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to my channel. And welcome back to Not All Men, the podcast where we go beyond the headlines to deconstruct masculinity, media, and injustice in the modern day world. I'm your host, Jerry, and today we're going to talk about something that has been blowing up in the podcast world, or really in the manosphere podcast world, sort of like the manosphere or like the podcast bros, like though that type of world has been blowing up. And I think it's one of those things that, to me, has been a discussion for a very long time that I feel like has now really sort of like reached a peak of people really deconstructing the impact of these podcast bros. And now I feel also this is the first time that any of these podcast bros are really facing hard backlash for their actions. Who knows if it's going to actually make some sort of an impact and change on their platform, or if they're going to get demonetized, or we never know. But it is interesting that for a while, I feel like a lot of people have been ringing the alarm bells about how these podcasts can be they can almost kind of seem like a Trojan horse for like bad ideas packaged in like a really cute way, and packaged in like a really like, we're just talking and we're just with the bros and we're just going to sit and talk, whatever, always sort of packaged as though it's just a conversation. And now they're finally getting the pushback that they have been needing. And it's interesting to see how this is all unfolding. So specifically, we are diving into two podcasts that I feel like are kind of hitting this, or kind of to me, in a similar situation as each other. And that is the Full Send podcast with the Nelk Boys, specifically where they interviewed Benjamin Netanyahu. If I messed that up, I really don't care because I hate that guy. So, and another tone deaf podcast, the Flagrant podcast with Andrew Schultz, and the rest of the men whose names I really don't care to learn. I just know them as the Giggle Squad, as the men who just giggle at all of his jokes. So, and a lot of their recent comments when it comes to Donald Trump, and they're not being able to seemingly understand why there's so much pushback against them, or they don't understand why people are mad at them, I guess, or have criticism of them. So yeah, I'll be talking about both of these situations because I think they're both very similar of things that is kind of almost what I touched on a little bit with my Jake Shields episode. This idea that you're bringing people onto your podcast with little to no research. You're not pushing back on anything that they're saying. You're allowing them to sit on your platform and spread whatever propaganda they want without you ever having done research or not really wanting to ask those hard questions, and how that in turn is harmful. These interviews aren't done for journalism's sake. They aren't done to give people both sides of an argument. And even then, does every side of an argument need to be heard, especially when one side of an argument is very bigoted? I personally don't think so. And it almost kind of feels almost like Jubilee-ish, right? Like they have this idea, we're just like wanting to show all sides of evil, I guess. But it's like, no, these interviews, the interviewers are never informed. They don't do their research. They come on there with their own biases, with their own misinformation, that they've done little to no reading about what's actually going on. And the worst part about it is these creators, these podcasts, they believe that they're harmless with like, it's just content, bro. They'll do anything for just the content, but it's not just content. It's complicity. And today I want to explain why. So let's start off with talking about the Nelk Boys, or the Full Send podcast. The Nelk Boys, at least when I started to know who they were, was probably around 2020. They were more known for their pranks, kind of being a little bit like edgelords a little bit. I remember they had gone pretty viral for their support for Donald Trump. They had like this like frat boy type of energy. They're known for like partying and influencer chaos and going full send. I think full send was like their trademark for a while, which is why their podcast is called Full Send. They also have a Happy Dad, which is their, I think that's a seltzer. I don't know. I've never seen it in person, surprisingly, because I think it's in a lot of stores. But I believe it's like a seltzer. I hate seltzer. But yeah, they have, I don't know why I decided to share that, but yeah, they have a seltzer, I believe it's called Happy Dad. And over the years, just like with any creator that blows up, they start a podcast. And a lot of their podcast in the very beginning was just like having their friends on, having on other influencers or maybe bigger celebrities, having on fighters. They've had fighters on, of course, because they have associated themselves with Dana White. Dana White has been on their podcast often and even says that he prefers to go on podcasts like theirs instead of talking to actual journalists, because with influencers, they're not journalists. And so they're not going to ask you hard questions. They're wanting to go on there and essentially just talk. And they're not really going to, even if they do ask you a hard question, you could just give a PR answer and they're not really going to like push back against you because that's not their job. And that's why Dana White recently hasn't really been talking to any journalists and just going on podcasts like these, which should tell you something. But over the time, and of course, the Noke Boys have always had public support towards Donald Trump, but definitely during in 2024, I think 2020 on, they started to have more high profile figures on their podcast, like Donald Trump, Andrew Tate, and recently Benjamin Netanyahu. If you don't know Netanyahu, Benjamin Netanyahu. If I mess up his name, I'm so sorry. If you don't know Benjamin Netanyahu, he's pretty important to everything that's happening. Like everything. He's the current prime minister of Israel and is overseeing the military campaign in Gaza that has resulted in tens and thousands of deaths, mass displacement, and has been widely condemned by human rights organizations. He has been accused of war crimes, civilian starvation, and genocide. So, what did the Nelk boys do? It was before I even go into what they did, even before the interview started, they were like, oh, we shouldn't be the ones doing this interview. We shouldn't be the ones doing this interview. And then you do it anyway. Like, you knew even before you turned the camera on, put the mics on, and put that little tight ass suit on, that like you weren't qualified to interview this man, but you did it anyway. And in the interview, they sit down with Netanyahu and they ask him questions. Sure, they try to hit on hard questions that, what do you say about people saying that you're starving the people in Gaza? And of course, Netanyahu gives them an answer and then they're kind of like, okay. And then they move on. And they also ask him, like, do you like Burger King or McDonald's? And then Netanyahu talks about his love for Burger King over McDonald's. In the same interview asking like, what do you say to people who say you're starving people in Gaza? That to me just like doesn't fit in the same interview in my opinion, and to a lot of people's opinion. It's like you're asking this man about his Burger King order while there are people currently dying. To me, this interview was not journalism. And from what I'm seeing, which the Nelk Boys did some interviews after the backlash of all of this. And I mean, sometimes they would say they were journalists and sometimes they say that they weren't. But this is not journalism. It's nowhere near journalism. It's not holding anyone accountable. It's not even curiosity. It's performance. An attempt to appear political without doing any of the emotional, intellectual, or moral labor that politics requires. And when they are called out, even by their fans in their own comment section, they double down. They even, like I said, they went on with a bunch of live streamers afterwards. And they talked to people like Hassan Piker and Sneeko and the Marlon Gaines, Nick Fuentes. I couldn't think of his name for the longest, which, I mean, three of those people are absolutely reprehensible. But with Hassan Piker, at least, with Hassan Piker, at one point when they were talking to him, they were like, you would do it. Like, you wouldn't turn down an interview with Netanyahu. And Hassan Piker said, yeah, I wouldn't turn down an interview. But the thing is, Hassan Piker said, I would never get that interview with Netanyahu because I've been so critical of Israel and all of its crimes. He's been critical of them even before what happened on October 7th. Also, Hassan Piker then also put in that same sentence when he was talking to them how he wouldn't interview him because Hassan wouldn't interview Netanyahu because it morally would just feel wrong. What are you doing on my platform? What are you doing to talk to my listeners. What does that do for you and I? You know, what does a conversation with someone like him, what does it do? Are you calling him what he's been hearing this entire time to his face? Like, what does it actually do? I hated how after the backlash, when people were still like they tried to like go on and do some of their regular content. I hated how after the backlash they were like, oh, we're gonna have both sides on and we're gonna get the other side. The terror that's happening to Palestinians is not a both sides issue. This is not about which football team do you think is gonna win the Super Bowl or Happy Dad versus Coors Light. Like this is serious. People are starving, dying, being unalived while trying to get food for their families. Children, and I've seen videos, children and adults are so malnourished that they are skin and bones. You're asking this leader, this war criminal, this awful human being that has literally can't go to some parts in the world without being arrested on the spot for the atrocities that he's done towards Palestinians. You were sitting across from him asking him about his Burger King order, and someone spliced it together. And if there's a video of them asking him about Burger King versus McDonald's, and the video below it is the footage that's been coming out of Gaza of screaming children having bowls in their hands, screaming for food, just a little bit of food that they have. People who just they're starving. They're starved. And this is what you choose to do, sitting in the same room as this man. It's just awful. There's a difference between hosting someone controversial and challenging this person, and hosting this person just to farm clout or farm whatever they were trying to do is gross. The Nelk boys were not equipped to do this interview and have stated many, many times that they weren't equipped to do this interview. And they refuse to acknowledge how sitting on that podcast with this awful man, sitting on the podcast with him does more harm than good because you were giving a platform where I honestly couldn't get myself to even want to click on the video. And I just decided to watch some clips about it because I didn't really give it a view. And Netanyahu sat on that platform and lied multiple times. He lied. He lied about why they're starving in Gaza. He lied. He just sat there and just lied. And someone who is a skilled journalist who understands the importance of an interview like this would have sat there and called him out on his lies. Both the Nelk boys, to me, and this is the reason why I think with a lot of these influencer fronted podcasts are annoying, is they'll get a celebrity or a controversial person on and they maybe will ask him a hard question or maybe one that like the internet has been wanting to know or maybe something viral or whatever. They'll ask them that question, but there's never any follow-up. There's never any explain that. There's never any deeper thought into the answer to the questions that they give. It's just always like, okay, moving on to the next question. And that to me is the big problem with a lot of these influencer non-journalistic podcasts interviewing controversial guests. And they don't know that they're being played. They're being played directly to their face because they're willing to accept the lie outright. They're willing to accept the lie without any sort of accountability. And this is just the most egregious version of that. Now let's jump to the Flagrant podcast. Andrew Schultz and crew, which no, again, I'm not going to remember I'm not going to figure out what their names are, recently expressed regret and disappointment. A lot of the internet, rightfully so, was like, well, what did you expect? Did you expect that when he sat there on your little couch that he wasn't just going to tell you everything that you and your little giggle squad next to you wanted to hear? But here's the problem. They had him on their show after Donald Trump had already had like 4 years in office. That's crazy. So we had 4 years of knowing exactly who Donald Trump was. And in fact, to this day, that man does not accept that he lost the 2020 election to this day. So we had 4 years of knowing that this man is cuckoo, like he crazy. We've had 4 years of knowing that he's racist. We've had 4 years of knowing his stance on Israel. We've had 4 years of knowing who he is. The only difference is he's just now more extreme. The handcuffs are off, literally and metaphorically. And now he's just more unhinged. You didn't think he was gonna be that when he was elected in again? He had an axe to grind after he lost that 2020 election, and he was going to make all of America feel it. We had, during his first 4 years, we had the Muslim ban. We had Charlottesville and his comments after Charlottesville. We had children being separated from their families. We also had January 6th, all in his first 4 years. What do you mean? What do you mean you didn't know that he was going to be worse? You didn't know that he was just going to continue on being that same guy? It's not like we didn't have 4 years of knowing that. And so him to sit there and be like, I voted for none of this. You did. You did. You and your little giggle squad brought him on your show. You joked with him, even in the beginning, like, I believe uh, the other comedian on the show, I forget what his name is, but he was like, oh, Donald Trump, we said that, you're such a great father. And you turned around and you said all these great things about your kid and how you're so proud of your kid. And that right there, that's amazing. You sat there on your platform and said that. And you're saying you didn't humanize him or you didn't make him seem like he was just this, uh, this like you didn't make him out to seem like he wasn't just the awful person that he is. You treated him almost like a misunderstood uncle. When Trump won more support from young men and influencers, they celebrated. They celebrated his win on their podcast with like wine or champagne or whatever. And they, at the time, and they want to act like they didn't, but at the time, they did take credit for helping him win. And they even broke down fundamentally how they thought Kamala lost without going on certain podcasts like theirs. They understood that their impact as being in conjunction to um, their impact in conjunction to legacy media, how their impact was greater than legacy media. They understood that. And so to act like, oh, well, like we didn't help him win the election. Sure, you weren't the ones out there like actively handing out flyers and like getting people to like check Trump on the ballot, but you did in Trump's press run for his second presidency. You were one of the people who he sat down with and actively brought him onto your podcast to show him to your audience, to people who watch your podcast, listen to your podcast. Like you brought him on to actively, you brought him on to humanize him, to hear what he had to say, to hear him out. And sure, they also wanted Kamala on. And Kamala said, no, I don't want to. And I don't think Kamala said, no, I don't want to go on their podcast because I don't want to win the election. But she said no, probably to their podcast because I have a clip I want to show you of probably why she said no to their podcast and any of those other bro manosphere podcasts because the stuff that they were saying about her was awful.
He's out and Kamala's in. The election went from drool runnings to cool runnings faster than a female cop can fumble her firearm. Move over, RFK. This November, we've got a new throat goat, and apparently her headshots don't miss. Kamala Harris, or as we call her, Warhawk Tua, the half-black, half-Indian, parents met at a 7-Eleven robbery, is officially the Democratic nominee.
Why would I want to go on a podcast like that? And Andrew Schultz loves to do this thing. He loves to do this thing because there was a one blip in time where people were really looking at him and the other podcast bros as being like journalists. And this is like the new wave of non-legacy media that everyone should be paying attention to. And like now he sort of has this like ever since he has that like freaking mustache, he like walks around as though he's this philosopher and he's so smart and he's smarter than the average American and smarter than, all of these other intellectuals, and he's always got these epiphanies that he's talking about on his podcast. You can't be an intellectual and like not do any inner work or know. Like a lot of intellectuals criticize their own work. They go back and they think about their own work. They go back and they think about some of their own opinions and are willing to be challenged. And now him and his little giggle squad are disappointed. They say they like didn't see this coming, even though again we had a previous 4 years of this president. And like their now stance on Trump to me is not accountability because they refuse to take it. It's like a reputation damage control because now they're having on a bunch of these Democrat people or people who are on the left. They're having a lot of them on their podcast and they're talking to them about politics when it's like, you should have done this before the election. Or maybe had both sides on before the election. The damage is done now. The damage is done now. This is all just having these male Democrat people come in and talk to you. It's all damage control. I want to reiterate something. Andrew Schultz is like 40. He's like 41, 42. The fact that he couldn't see with all of his wisdom and smarts Trump on a comedy podcast with no critical framework during a time of an election, the heat of the election was dangerous is mind-boggling to me. At least dangerous for their own reputation. Andrew has recently also said they didn't want to ask him about Epstein, which is the catalyst for why they said they were disappointed in Trump is because Trump has been basically saying that he's not, that the Epstein list is like a Democrat conspiracy theory list and all of its BS and who's still talking about Epstein's type stuff like that. And that's the whole reason why the guys on the Flagrant podcast have been so disappointed with Trump. And Andrew Schultz said that when Trump was on their podcast, that he didn't want to ask Trump about Epstein because he was like, well, he's just going to give me a PR answer. Like, he's not really going to give me the truth about Epstein or his involvement with Epstein, which is like, well, duh. Like, he's not, of course not going to be like, oh yeah, me and Epstein were like chilling on the yacht. Like, he's not going to say that, but you at least ask it. And then when he gives you the PR answer, a good journalist knows how to hit back with facts, evidence, other things like that to make it, though it is an actual question worth asking. You know, if Andrew Schultz had asked Trump about Epstein, he would have been like, what about Epstein? And then Trump would have given the PR answer and then they would have just moved on. A true journalist wouldn't have let Trump out of that. And Trump knew you weren't going to ask him about Epstein. He knew you wanted him on your platform. It was a mutual beneficial thing. And if he storms off your set, sure, it would have been, viral or whatever. But that's not really what you wanted. And he knew and Trump knew that's not what you were going to do. Because even if you did ask about Epstein, Trump also knew that he's got a PR answer ready and you're not going to push back against it because you don't come with facts. All you come with is that long-haired dude with a laptop. That's all you come with when it comes to actual fact checking is a long-haired dude with a laptop. That's pretty much it. Trump went on their show knowing he wouldn't get pushed back during that interview. That's what authoritarians do. They pick easy targets who will laugh, nod, and make them look human. He just chose you all. And didn't know who chose the Nelk Boys. They weren't journalists. And that moment in that interview with Trump, they weren't journalists. They weren't even comedians. They were pawns. He used you, Andrew Schultz and the Giggle Squad. He used you because you were easy, because he knew he could, because he knew that he could use your platform to humanize him more than Fox News could. They don't want to take responsibility for that because that's doing the hard work. And from Andrew Schultz and the Giggle Squad, but more importantly, Andrew Schultz seems to be someone who cannot do the hard emotional labor of having to say the words that he was wrong. And they probably never will. Now, I want to calm down a little on for this segment. I want to open it using the words that Andrew Schultz used after the election.
One thing that podcasting has done that's been really effective is build community and connection, right? Like, if you look at the biggest touring stand-up comedians in the world, right? They all have podcasts where they've built this amazing community and connection, and like we talk to people every single week. They know intimate details about our life. To me, what that's proven is that just because people are famous doesn't mean you go out. Yeah. Right? Connection is actually what makes people go out. To me, the difference between new media and legacy media is connection. Okay. The purpose of this podcast is to get people invested in our lives and then be along for that journey, be it we go do stand-up shows, we go do some sort of live tour, some live activation, just be part of our lives. The purpose of legacy media is to sell depression pills.
The deeper issue is the just content defense. Podcasting today has exploded. You have some podcasts that are reaching numbers that are well beyond numbers of CNN or MSNBC. They have weekly listeners that will listen to anything and everything they say. And these podcast bros love to say that this is just us talking, or so they say. But when you have millions of followers, when your interviews are public opinion, when you normalize people like Netanyahu and Trump, you are the media. MSNBC and CNN and Fox News aren't getting these interviews. The only way that they are now able to hear from outside of just like the press podium or releasing PR statements, outside of it, you are now the only one that people can turn to when they are looking for answers coming directly from their mouths. And when that happens, you now become a part of the news. Your podcast is now a part of the news. You are now part of the media. You don't get to backtrack and act like you're not part of the media anymore. Your excuse of, we're just giving people a platform, falls apart when you realize you didn't challenge them, you don't do research, you don't contextualize their harm, and you didn't even represent the very people that they're hurting or the very people that is harmed under their leadership. You just wanted a headline. You just wanted these people on your platform. This is the same, again, logic that I brought up earlier with my other video with Jake Shields. And I've covered him on a mini episode of this podcast. He claims to be about free speech. And you also hear that with the Flagrant guys and then also with the Nelk Boys Full Send podcast, this free speech thing that they always are preaching about. But I called out Jake Shields for giving free speech and how that free speech you were giving to people who were spreading harm. With him, it was more about like white nationalists or misogynists and Holocaust deniers. The Nelk Boys and the Flagrant podcast may wear fancier mics and have better lighting, but they're playing the same game. It's the same problem. It's visibility over responsibility, content over actual care. Do you know what happens when you treat genocidal leaders, fascists, or abusers like they're just one of the guys? When you humanize them, you give them cover. You flatten their harm into a meme. You allow dangerous ideologies to sneak past defenses. You allow dangerous ideologies to sneak past our defenses. It's the same thing with like Kanye and his craziness, with Andrew Tate, with people who say, well, maybe they've got a point, or dismissing the mountain of harm that they've caused. Because you have now sat them down on hours long podcasts, and now you know little intimate parts of their life, whether it's Netanyahu's love for Burger King or Trump's appreciation of his children. You now know little parts of him that make him into these good parts, these fun parts, these and you're also sneaking in there, you know, Trump's immigration things and Netanyahu's starvation of people in Gaza. You're putting all of that in the same realm. You're putting all of that in the same lens. And it makes them out to be, oh, this person who's just trying to, who, you know, is misunderstood, or this person who's just soft. And we need to understand that things are complicated. I don't think it's fair to tell people you don't understand, it's just too complicated, when we clearly see evidence that the fact that it's not very complicated. Children being ripped away from their families, starving people who were nothing but skin and bones, who were being unalived for trying to get food for their family. That's not hard. That's not a complicated thing to stand up against. Podcasting is power. These platforms, even my itty bitty one that I don't think anyone's listening to, but even my itty bitty one, it matters. These podcasts, they matter, especially these huge ones, they matter. And when men with power say they're just being chill, just being open minded, just hearing a difference of opinion, they're forgetting something vital. Silence is not neutrality. Callousness is not objectivity. And normalizing cruelty is not a debate. Also, I want to add in there, having your buddies like Ilya Taporia come in and be like, "Oh, I thought you guys asked some great questions, and this situation that's happening is very complicated, and people shouldn't expect you all to like have all the answers and blah blah blah." Having those people come in to defend you, and you sit there and being like, "Yeah, yeah," on the side, instead of being like, "No, we probably shouldn't have interviewed him, and it was probably." Way over our heads. And this is a very serious issue. And even though we're not informed on it, and, we should have never had him on, that's what you should say. You made a mistake. Also, take down the interview. Just take it off the internet. Is there a contract with Nitnahu that you have to like have him? Like, is it your sponsors or whatever? I'm sure they'll be okay with not wanting to be on this podcast. Like, take the interview down. Take it down. Sorry. Take the interview down. Anyway, so, where do we go from here? We need to ask better of our creators, especially those creators who are now getting more and more access to leaders of this country or people who are in power. We need to demand more from the people who claim to lead conversations. Sometimes it's okay to say, no, I will not be doing this interview, or no, I don't want to give my platform to this person who I've done little to no research on, or no, I don't want to be a part of the political discourse because I have no clue what's going on, and I will not be doing that interview with insert leader here. It's okay to say no. Actually, I remember a couple of months ago during the 2020 election, and not 2020, oh my gosh, during the 2024 election, Kai Cenat went on his platform and said that Kamala Harris's team had reached out to him and said that she wanted to go on his stream. And it turned out that it wasn't Kamala Harris's team and nobody had reached out to him. It was like a spam, or it was like a scam or something like that. And at the time, I kind of sad. Well, I thought Kai was a little much, but I think he's always a little much. But he said something that I actually really agree with. And he said that if Kamala Harris came on his platform, he would have just been like, "Why are you here?" Again, as somebody who supported Kamala Harris, I would have been wondering the same thing. Why are you there? Why are you with a streamer who Kai Cenat doesn't talk about politics? He doesn't talk about his political leanings. He doesn't talk about anything political. And even if he does, it's probably like because it's like news or something. He's not someone who's going to use his platform for politics at all. Going on his live stream, all it really does is make you human to his audience, make you more palatable. It does nothing to make your platform more noticeable. It just does nothing but visibility, really, and to humanize. That's pretty much it. Because the Nelk Boys and the Flagrant podcast did something that did something that well, the Nelk Boys and the Flagrant podcast should have heeded what Kai Cenat said. What's the point? What's the point of you going on those podcasts? What is your motive behind going on there? We need to stop accepting the just content as an excuse for platforming power with critique. If you're listening to podcast hosts talk about how they're just curious, but they never seem to ask the right questions, be suspicious. Is it curiosity, or are they just pushing an agenda secretly? Because curiosity without accountability becomes complicity. And that's it. Thank you for tuning in to Not All Men podcast. If this episode made you think, or if you've seen this kind of clout chasing disguised as content or disguised as just asking questions, send it to a friend, post about it, talk about it. Because podcasting in and of itself isn't harmless, but it is shaping how we see the world. And if we don't check it, we're going to see the worst people get the biggest platforms. I'm Jerry, and I'll see you next time. And remember, if you've got a mic, you've got a responsibility. Thank you.